Hey there, greetings and welcome. This is Zach Parrish with Epic Games, and I wanted to record a quick video. You see, recently somebody asked me how you could go about blending between different cube maps in a Skylight. In this case, they had a list of HDR cube maps, and they wanted to kind of blend in between a list of them to denote time of day. And my immediate response was, yeah, of course you can do that. And then it occurred to me I'd never actually tried it and never set it up. So I went back to my desk and played with it for a few minutes, and I came up with a decent solution that I thought I would share with you. Just shoot a quick video and show you how I did it, and then if you want to use this in your projects, then, you know, cool, awesome. Now, real quick, I have, of course, this is the blueprint third-person template, which if you don't know how to do, this video might be a little over your head, but just go to New Project and, of course, create the third-person template. Now, also, in my content browser, you will see that I have 6 cube maps loaded in. Now, I'm not going to even bother redistributing these. I pulled these straight out of the content examples project and threw them into Photoshop and put like a really gnarly color cast on them. The cube maps themselves are not important. You can Google search HDR cube maps and probably find a massive collection of free ones that you can download. The point here, I just want to show how you can set up a quick system to blend through a list of them. And this list could be as long as you wanted. So here's how we're going to do this. Now, in this level setup, there is already a Skylight. So first thing is I'm going to get rid of that, because I'm going to add one of my own. So let's go under the lights section over here in placement mode, and there's a Skylight. I'm just going to magically bring it into view. I'm going to be performing some operations on this. I'm going to give it some behavior, and in order to do that, we want to convert it over to a blueprint. By the way, the stuff that I'm doing here, I'm sure you could do in code. This is just for quick prototyping, showing you an approach, and we're going to use timeline, which is a lot easier to do in Blueprint anyway. I don't want to autosave. Thanks anyway. So with my Skylight selected, let's click on Blueprint, Add Script, and it's going to say, awesome, you want to make a blueprint. I'm proud of you. Where do you want to save it? Let's just save it right at the root of content. This is going to be really simple. So we'll click Create, give it a second, and it's going to open up the mighty, mighty Blueprint editor. Awesome sauce. Okay, so now let's come over here to the event graph. What we're going to actually set up here is a timeline network that is just going to cycle through a list of cube maps. So knowing that, I mean, if you didn't know where to begin, you could at least say, well, what do I have? I don't know what I need to do, but I know what I have. And what I have is a list of cube maps. So let's start there. Let's build a list of cube maps right here in our script. I'll start off over here in the My Blueprint panel. We'll go under Variables, and I'll click Plus Variable. And let's call it like it is. Let's call this Cube Map List. I don't know why that gets the special announcer voice, but it does. All right, now let's take the type of this, and we're going to set it to a texture cube. Bunk, like so. And we'll click the Array button, because an array, as you probably already know, is just a list of things. Now we'll compile that. Compiling will give us access to the elements inside that array. I'm going to click the plus button 6 times. So we have 0 through 5. Now you might have any number of these, right? You could have a dozen for all we know, and that's fine. Now, probably by the end of this, I'm gonna end up clearing this out. We'll make it public, and then you can just drop this into any level, add in your cube maps, and you're good to go from there. But for now, we'll just do it all right here inside the blueprint. So if I click the first one, click none, notice I'm an artist. So when it came time to actually make my textures, I didn't zero base the numbers. So all of you programmery people in there can be scoffing at me because 0 is set to 1 and 1 is set to 2 and all that kind of stuff. There's number 5 and there's number 6. So cool. So I've just populated my list with all these cube maps. Excellent. We're good. Now, actually let me step back. Since we started off with a Skylight and we made that Skylight into a blueprint, we are adding some script to it. The light component, this Skylight, is our root component. So I'm going to drag a reference to this into the view. And then let's just, let's go back to we don't know what we're going to do. We're just going to say cube map. And if you look in some of your options, you can set the current cube map, which is great, but setting something is always an instantaneous thing. And this is not something we necessarily want to have be instantaneous. Sorry, I snapped my fingers if that was alarming to anybody in the room. What we're going to do is set cube map blend, which I'm not going to bother reading the entire tooltip, but it's a really informative tooltip. So what this is going to do is blend from one cube map to another cube map using a blend fraction. So 0 will be the source cube map, and 1 will be the destination cube map, which is great. That's awesome. So let's start building up our system. Now, I want to drive blend fraction over time. So this is where you may end up having to eventually do some math to figure out how fast this blend is going to be, but let's just kind of roll from here. I'm going to create a timeline node. So let's just type in timeline, and I'll go right to the bottom of the list. And we will call this the Cubemap Blender timeline. I always try to remember to rename my timelines, and I don't always remember to do it, but it's a good habit if you can get into it. Now, I'm going to double click that timeline, jump inside of it, and inside we will create a new float track, and we're going to name this, let's call it, actually, you know what, let's jump back. We're in blend fraction, cool. Well, let's name it something like that, right? So we'll just right click, rename. So in blend fraction, that way, at a glance, if anybody else ever comes in here, they'll know, hey, in blend fraction is supposed to go to in blend fraction. That'll make everybody happy. So meanwhile, back inside of our curve here, I'm going to hold down the shift key and just click 2 random times on this curve. I'll select the first keyframe, set its time to 0, hit the tab key, set its value to 0, which it was already. Let's grab the second keyframe, and we'll set the time to 1 second and the value also to 1 second, or no, to a value to 1. It's not a second, it's just a value. Cool, so this is just a linear transition. If you want to, I mean, linear is actually gonna be fine for what we're doing, but because I'm picky, we're gonna set this to a user curve, so it's got a nice ease in and ease out, and it's very pretty. I actually think it's ease out, well, whatever. All right, so now that we've got that, let's make sure we check use last keyframe for the total duration. That should be good. Jump out to our event graph. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we are going to have 2 variables plugged into source and destination cube map. And then the way this will work is we'll use our timeline to blend from the source to the destination. And then once we get to that point, once we're at the destination, we're going to swap out whatever was already plugged into the source destination for something else. And then we'll blend back over to that. Then while we're back over in the source once again, we're going to change out the destination cube map, and then we'll blend back over to that. And we'll just constantly keep penduluming back and forth. Blend to this one, change the other one. Blend to the other one, change the first one. And just keep doing that over and over. So let's get that set up. Now the way I'm going to do it, and there's a lot of ways to approach this problem. The way I'm going to do it though, is we'll start over here in the source cube map. We're going to right click and promote this to a variable. And I'm going to call this Cubemap slot 1. I don't really want to think about it in terms of source and destination because we're actually going to be blending back and forth. If I think about it in terms of slot 1 and slot 2, I know that I can blend to slot 2 and change out slot 1. Blend back to slot 1, change out slot 2. And kind of, it's almost like a dance, right? You kind of feel your shoulders moving with it. At least I do. So let's make another variable over here. Promote this to variable. We'll call it Cubemap slot 2. And now that I'm dancing, I got like a lounge singer thing going on. That's horrible, by the way. All right, so cool. We have our 2 slots. Now notice, all I did was just create those as variables. We need to give them some values though, so I'm going to compile. And then for slot 1, we will set this to Cubemap 1, which is the first thing in our list. We're going to take Cubemap slot 2 and set that to Cubemap 2, which is the second thing in our list. So that's kind of a way to sort of pre-initialize this setup, right? So if you were setting this up via a public list, you would probably want to do something on begin play to populate those first 2 points, but that just yet. Okay, so now that we've got that, we could just say update and let's say blend fraction. I'm going to plug this in here, but just in case people are trying really hard to read the wires on the screen, I'll use some reroute nodes to kind of separate things out. You can always create those just by double clicking on a wire. It's super cool and super convenient, and I think it only works like in, I think it's like 4.8 and later. So if you're using like a really early version, it may not work. Okay, so if all I did was jump in and play this, we should get a transition from one Skylight to another. Now, to really make this show up, actually really quick, let me jump over here. Let's grab our Skylight. We want this to be super apparent, so I'm going to take the intensity and just lift it really high. Oh, actually, that might be that might be a little too high. You think? It's like some sort of horrible weapon has gone off and is slowly disintegrating the planet. So let's make sure we take the Skylight. We'll set its source type to SLS specified Cubemap, and we're going to specify Cubemap 1 in its value. So the way I've done this, by the way, I was starting to just kind of march through the rainbow, if you hadn't quite caught on to that when you were looking earlier at my Cubemaps. So we got red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and I made it to indigo, and I was just like, okay, I'm bored now, so that's enough anyway. So we'll go ahead and set this to Cubemap 1. This is really just so I can see something in the viewport. And if I compile, and I'm going to get this off the window, and we'll just simulate real fast. Is anything going to happen? No, it's not. Of course it's not going to happen. This is where you can be like, Zach, why do you even try? Because we need to take our timeline, at least for the time being, double click it and set this to autoplay. We could loop it, but I'm not going to bother. So just with that, let's compile and let's hit play. We should get a transition. There we go. Yep. So it immediately transitioned from red over to yellow. So the system is working. It's doing what it's supposed to do. Now, though, we need to set up those next few bits, right? We need to go from, once we've transitioned from slot 1 to slot 2, which that was successful, we just did. Now we need to set up a system that will swap out whatever was in slot 2 for the next cube map in the list, so we can blend back over to that. Then we'll swap out what's in slot 2 and blend back over to that, and so on and so forth. Now to do this, we're going to set up some custom events. Let's write a custom event, just like a function. We're going to call this update slot 1. I mean, if I wanted to be super verbose, I would probably call it update Cubemap slot 1, but at some point I'm typing too much. So all this is going to do is grab our list, and it's going to figure out what item is currently, so it's going to grab whatever's in slot 1 inside this variable right now and say, hey, where does that exist in our list, right? So let's do that. Let's grab slot 1. We'll get it. And over here from our cube map, we can drag a wire out. We can call a special function called find item. And then plug in slot 1. So what is this going to do? This is going to say, hey, I want you to find whatever I have here inside of slot 1 in the list and tell me what index that is in the array, right? So cool. Now we're going to take that and we're going to add 2 to it. You can say +2. I'd love to do that, and maybe someday you can just type +2. I get carried away. All right, so we're going to add 2 to it. Why are we adding 2? Well, because slot 1, let's just start at the very beginning. Slot 1 has texture 1 in it, right? When you first start out. Slot 2 has texture 2. What we actually want is the next one in the list, which would be slot 3. So what's the difference between 1 and 3? Well, it's 2. So we jump and we go to 2. So we jump 2 and go to 3. So we start out at texture 1, skip 2, grab 3. The next time we'll be at 3, but the next texture from that, slot 4, will be over in the other one. So we're always jumping 1 over. So it's +2. Now, the other side of this, though, is that we want our list to constantly wrap around, right? If your texture set, if all of your cube maps denoted full time of day, like the sun going from east to west and then the moon following and stars and whatever you need there for your cube map, no, don't autosave yet. Then you want that to constantly wrap around and constantly cycle over and over again. To do that, we are going to use modulo. So what modulo is going to do is just output the numbers up to this value. So if we set this to, say, 5, we'd get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 as we keep incrementing it. But we don't know what we want this modulo to be. So what we'll do is we'll take our cube map, we will get its length. This tells us how many things are in it, and we'll set that to the result of the modulo. Cool, so all this is doing is just making sure that if we, let's say we are at texture 6 out of 6, right? We're on our last texture. If we add 2 to that, we need to wrap back around and skip all the way to 1 and then 2, right? So this is gonna help us handle that wraparound. So now that we have that, we just need to set the new value for slot 1. oh, not get, we want to set. So you know what, let me just alt drag slot 1 over. We're going to set that. But how do we get the value? Well, I'm going to drag another wire from my array, and we will just say get. And this will get whatever is currently stored in our list at this number. And we will plug that, boom, in like so. Cool, so that's going to update that slot. Now, we could just connect that like so, right? No problem. Now, here's the thing, right? So all of this stuff, this is an operation we're going to have to do again for slot 2, right? We could just take the whole thing, copy, paste it, and swap out some values and so forth. But if you have an operation that you know you're going to be using a couple of times, it's generally a good idea to put it into some sort of reusable form. So let's grab everything up here, and let's just say we right-click and make this a macro. Now, check this out. It's saying we have like all these 3 plugs, you know, target array and then target array again. This is really just kind of the automatic way to crush this down. Now, you're probably already asking, why'd you use a macro? Why didn't you use something else? I'll get to that. We'll come back around to that question. First, clean this up. A name for this. I do like naming these, so let's rename this macro over here in my blueprint. We'll call this update slot. And then currently you'll see like it's got all these different inputs, but they're all inputs for the same thing. So let's just disconnect here and disconnect here, and we'll just reconnect from this single point. Because then we can take our inputs and just destroy the ones we're not using. There you go. So now we just have target array and item to find, and that's it. And then we could rename those. We could call this Cubemap list and slot. Cool. So let's compile that. And now if we step back up one or back out to the event graph, there we go. We just have this single node. We plug a Cubemap into it. And then we get whatever our new slot is going to need to be, which is pretty cool. Okay, so now we need to do that again for slot 2. Here's why I chose a macro. A macro is useful for any bit of code that you know you want to reuse multiple times, but you only want to ever have to edit it once. Like let's say I messed up on update slot and I needed to fix the way it's used. Well, if I had done like say collapse node, I would have to go in and fix it every single time that I used it. But if it's a macro, then I just have to fix it once and it updates everywhere. So let's just right click and we'll say update slot, and there it is. It's now a utility. Blam. It's going to ask for a Cubemap list. So let's plug in our Cubemap list. It's going to ask for a slot. So let's plug that in. And then it's just going to give us an output that we can use. Again, we'll just alt drag slot 2 out. Bink. We do need to create a custom event for this. So this will be update, actually, custom event. You know, I have actually bugged some of the engineers up here. What I would love, since you're just sitting here listening, I'll let you humor me for just a minute. I just want to type anything in here like Gooseball or whatever, and I want to see an option for, would you like to create a custom event called Gooseball? I want that so bad, and one day maybe I'll get it. All right, so anyway, custom event. It's just because I get carried away and excited, right? So we'll call this update slot 2. So when update slot 2 is called, it's just going to do that. Okay, and then just really quick, just as a review, so it's going to grab the list. It's going to find whatever item we currently have in the slot. It's going to add 2 to it, and then get the modulo of that based on the length. So we're constantly wrapping around the list. Get that value out of the list, and then make that the output, so that we can just plug it right into the variable. Okay, so that was cool, and that was relatively easy. Now we just have a little bit of work to do. So actually, let me step back one moment. What we've just done is we've created some swapping mechanisms. We now have the ability to update the value of slot 1 to whatever the next texture in the list should be, and the same with slot 2. Now we just need to call those at the right time. The way we're going to do that is we're going to make use of the finished pin on the timeline and the directional output from the timeline as well as a switching mechanism. So if you didn't know, you can take the direction from, actually, you know what, hang on. Again, we'll come to that in just a moment. I just want to make sure I'm doing this in an order that's as easy as I can make it to understand, right? So let's do this. I'm going to make 2 custom events. First one will be called play Cubemap transition. I know that's a little long, but it gets the point across, right? And that will be play from start. Next, we're going to create another custom event, which we will call reverse Cubemap transition. Now that sounds a little weird, but you have to remember how a timeline works. A timeline is going to allow you to play a curve forward. Let me come over here to this curve. It's going to sample this moving forward, and then it'll sample it. If you reverse, it's going to sample it moving backward. So this is how we're going to leverage blending from slot 1 to slot 2, and we'll swap out, we'll change slot 1, and we'll blend from 2 back to 1. Swap out 2, blend back over to 2, and so on. So we're always doing this kind of pendulumatic motion. That's why we have to reverse. So let's go ahead and save this real quick in case something explodes at some point. So we have our 2 events that are responsible for making that happen. Cool. Now, back to what I was saying a moment ago. We can use the direction output from a timeline to create kind of a switch. We can basically have different behavior based on the direction the timeline was playing. So let's drag a wire out of direction, and we're going to say switch. Just type in switch, and you'll get switch on E timeline direction, because that's an enum. And what you get is this option that takes in an execution pin. By the way, plug this into finished, because this is something we want to fire once we reach the end of playback, whether we played forward or backward, right? And what this means, these outputs mean this pin will fire if we just finished playing forward, and this pin will fire if we just finished playing backward. Cool, huh? So if we just finished playing forward, then that means we have moved from slot 1 to slot 2. Awesome. So if we've just done that, let's update slot 1. Bink. Now that we've updated slot 1, let's reverse the Cubemap transition. See, once you get those names in place, it becomes really easy to write this kind of stuff. You just basically say what you want to do, and Blueprint will do it. Now, if we just got done playing backward, we want to update slot 2, and then we want to play the timeline transition, or the Cubemap transition. All right, now I'm gonna try to fit all this on the screen, because there's probably 1 or 2 of you that want to take a screenshot or pause the video or do one of those kind of cool things. Now, real quick, I'm gonna jump into my timeline. I'm gonna turn off autoplay. Yeah, I don't have to. I could just leave it running, but this is just I guess a personal preference. I'm gonna come down here to begin play, and we're gonna write a really quick system. Now earlier, remember, I took slot 1 and I set it to Cubemap 1, and I took slot 2 and I set it to Cubemap 2. Let's write a really quick system that will do that for us, okay? So let's grab our Cubemap. We're gonna get that, and then we will say get index 0, that's fine. And I want you to set that to Cubemap 1. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna try to fit all of this on the screen. So I'm gonna do something maybe a little weird, okay? So bear with me just a moment. I do this for you, because again, if you want to take a screenshot or something, actually I could probably zoom back just a little bit and you'll probably still be able to get it all. But what I'm gonna do is cut this out, and we'll throw begin play into a quick sequence. So it'll be a list. It'll just make it a little bit easier for me to organize on the screen. So first thing, once we hit begin play, is we're gonna set the value for Cubemap 1, or I'm sorry, Cubemap slot 1, to the first thing in the Cubemap list. Then we're going to set Cubemap slot 2. You can type it that way. I often don't do that, but when you want it, it's kind of nice, right? We're going to set that. We'll just say get, and we'll get whatever is in index 1, which is the second thing in the list, and we'll set that. Finally, the last thing we will do in our sequence is we will call play Cubemap transition, and that will fire off our timeline. So there's everything. And here, if I rip out the event graph and I just float it and I make it full screen, there. Now if you want to, you could pause the video and you can see the entire network with nothing really hidden except what we did inside these update slot guys, which really quick, I'm gonna open those up. Double click. Oh, sorry, it's not inside the event graph, it's in update slot. Let me do that too. So we'll float this, so I'll pop it in this window. And there's that, and I don't think any wires are overlapping to the point that it's hard to read. This should be pretty easy, so you can take quick screenshots if you want to. Okay, so awesome. Let's get those put back in their spots. We'll compile this. We will save this. And now let's jump back out here to the third person map and let's simulate. We got a yellow, green, blue, and okay, obviously this is super bright and it's overdriven, but you can see that we are constantly cycling through our list. We go from red to red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, back to red, and so on. So boom, 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 over and over. So we are transitioning, albeit very, very rapidly, through our list of images. That's awesome. So before we wrap up though, let's do a couple of quick things to make this a little easier for a user to actually play with. So if we select our Skylight here, let's jump back into the blueprint for just a moment. We're going to take the Cubemap list and we're going to make this public. And now, since we made it public, let's jump back over here to the details panel, compile. There we go. We should probably add a tooltip. So this should be a list of Cubemaps to cycle through, okay? And then if you wanted to change the time of the transition, you could just set your last keyframes time here, right? So the time, instead of being 1 second, let's maybe make it 5 seconds. So it'll be a much slower transition, but still, you know, pretty quick for doing like time of day in a game. Obviously, you'd probably want to set it to something much, much longer for your own setup. Now here's the cool thing. Our Cubemap list already has 6 elements, totally public now. So if we wanted to, if we had like another list of 6 things or 20 things or whatever, we can edit this list on a Skylight by Skylight basis. We could just drag and drop this right into the world. Like for example, we could completely remove this. We can go back out to our blueprint, just drag it in, and then update these, change them out, add new ones, remove them, pull it down to 3 or whatever, and everything should just work. Now, there's a caveat here, right? We should have at least 2 Cubemaps in order to use this, and I don't have a try-catch for that. So this would be one of those things where you'd want to make sure your developers knew, hey, don't add our little Skylight cycling blueprint unless you have a couple of different Cubemaps. Hopefully that goes without saying, but you know, communication's important. So with that, let's jump in one more time. I guess is there anything else I want to do? I mean, of course, you could speed up and slow down the play rate of your timeline, and you can make that a public variable if you wanted to kind of go the extra mile in terms of controlling speed. I'll leave that up to you. It's very, very easy. Let's go ahead and do a quick play, and we see we get a nice transition from red to yellow. From yellow shifting over to green now, so that 5-second transition is really starting to hit up. And again, I just want to point out, yes, I know this is nuclear washed out. It's really just to show that we've got our transitions taking place. So that's it. That's everything I wanted to show. Just a way for you to be able to take a list of HDR Cubemaps and blend through them using a Skylight. That is going to wrap things up for this video. Thank you so much for watching and so much for being an Unreal Engine 4 user. Take care. We hope to see you soon.